Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator today for this wonderful session with Dr. Paul Bendheim, and he's going to be talking about Alzheimer's and other dementias and how to prevent them, and that's an awfully interesting topic for us all, I'm sure. Before he gets started sharing information, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Paul Bendheim is a board-certified neurologist, clinical professor of neurology at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, Arizona, and founder of the BrainSavers Brain Plus Body Total Fitness Program. His undergraduate degree is from Pomona College, where he graduated cum laude with a major in art history. Boy, he's gone a long way from there, hadn't he? He then attended the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson, receiving his MD with honors. He trained initially in internal medicine and then completed a neurology residency and postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of California in San Francisco. He has lectured around the world, published numerous scientific research articles, and is the author of the book, The Brain Training Revolution, a proven workout for healthy brain aging. Welcome, Dr. Bendheim.
Well, thanks, Glenda. Geez, you make my head swell a little bit. And let me just start by thanking you and the entire group at WellMed Medical and WellMed Charitable Foundation. As some of you know, the BrainSavers and WellMed have formed a really beneficial partnership, and I'm proud to be part of that. So without further ado, what I'd like to cover today is a very big, important topic, and that is how can Alzheimer's and some other types of dementias be prevented? And what can each of us and every one of us do in our daily lives to reduce our risk of cognitive decline, of which the big bad wolf in the closet is Alzheimer's disease. And I'll start by saying when I was a medical student and even as a neurology resident, what I'm going to talk about today didn't exist. If someone had proposed that you could actually change the shape of your brain when you're 70, 80, even 90 years old and build what we call cognitive or brain reserve to greatly reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease, he or she would have been laughed at. When I was a student, I was privileged to spend time in New York City at the Neurological Institute of Columbia University, where Professor Houston Merritt, arguably the most famous name in the history of neurology in this country, still came in once a week to meet with the students. And he said something that so impacted me that I have it in my book. And that was the central dogma of the aging brain way back then. What Dr. Merritt said, the worst thing about growing old is listening to my brain cells commit suicide. That was the central dogma of the aging brain, that you were born with this amazing, wonderful organ, the human brain, and it served you well until about the age of 40. And then it started to unravel. And if you were lucky, it unraveled slowly and you lived to 70, 80, beyond, mentally, cognitively intact. If you were unlucky, it unraveled more quickly and you became, in his words, senile. That was the old term for what we now call dementia. Well, beginning about 25, even 30 years ago, first scientists in the animal lab, and then later scientists working with humans, demonstrated that that central dogma was categorically, absolutely wrong. We now know that you can maintain your brain, you can strengthen it, you can grow new cells and new connection synapses. And I'll get back to that later. So you're all here for the same reason I'm here. We are worried about losing it as we get older. And that now has become one of the top 2 or 3 worries of aging Americans. The goal of BrainSavers, the goal of the WellMed Healthy Brain Initiative is to promote healthy brain aging and reduce the risk of cognitive decline, dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease. And the brain is unique among all the organs of your wonderful body in that it's the one organ that actually can become more powerful with age if it's well nourished. So an older brain is better at making decisions. It has more knowledge. It's more creative. It's emotionally more stable. And that's true across all professions, even politicians. Uh, uh, the better ones become wiser with age. Uh, and think about it. The doctors you see, lawyers, accountants, teachers, administrators, generally, the older they are, the better they are because the brain learns from experience. So this all started, at least my journey did, when I was reviewing a grant for a philanthropy where I serve on the scientific advisory board. And this grant, this is going back now 25 years, talked about the benefits of physical exercise for the aging brain. And like I said, when I was a student and a resident, that would have been considered voodoo science. Well, that grant proposal really sparked my interest. And I was fortunate to have parents who still, my mother was still playing tennis at the age of 86. My father was hiking the mountains around Phoenix until he was almost 90 years old. And I said, well, maybe I can do something by building healthcare facilities for aging Americans with the emphasis on the brain. And so that I wrote this book, and that was the basis for starting BrainSavers. So back to WellMed. I applaud them. I think they're the first in the country of all the big health plans to start this brain health initiative. And I highlighted at the bottom, uh, they've actually moved toward this holistic approach to brain health and physical health by leveraging caregiver and senior center resources. And I urge all of you, if you're members of WellMed, or even if you're not, their senior centers, their community centers are open to the public. And they are really a joy to see and participate in the myriad of activities, including socialization, which is one of the critical factors in promoting healthy aging. So let's now turn to the subject at hand, Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline. What are the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease? Is the first topic I'll spend a few minutes on. And then I'll talk about how you can modify those risk factors, reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And across the country, we can actually prevent millions of cases if, as a society, we make adjustments to our lifestyle. And then what each of us can do to reduce our own personal risk by as much as 50%. Some authorities now would put that at 60 or 70%. And those are very profound numbers. If we had a drug that could reduce Alzheimer's disease by 50%, it would be a multi-billion-dollar blockbuster. So here's the first risk factor, and that's age, which we really can't do anything about on the calendar, but we can do a lot about how we age. So the first time in the history of Western civilization, about 5 years ago, the number of individuals over 65 surpassed the number of individuals under the age of 5. And you can see the trend. In another 25 years, about 17% of the American population will be over 75. Only about 7% will be under the age of 5. So this places a tremendous burden, but also an opportunity on our healthcare system to promote healthy aging and wellness well into people's 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. So a little bit of anatomy, because we're talking about the brain. So here are pictures of the brain, and on the left you see the major lobes of the brain. And I'll just point out the frontal lobe. The reason that our foreheads bow out is because over evolution, that's been the great advance in the primate, primarily the human brain. And so the frontal lobe is where resides all those complex activities that enable each of us to do things that only humans can do. And we'll call it the executive function. The CEO of the brain is in the frontal lobe. And then the temporal lobe on the side, we'll talk a bit more about it because that's where the hippocampus is. And that's where a language function and auditory abilities reside. The parietal lobe is where all senses that come in through your eyes, ears, nose, touch are made conscious. And the very back of the brain, the occipital lobe, is where vision is manifest and interpreted. And I'll point out on the right, I don't think, does my pointer show this? Do you see my pointer?
Yes.
Okay, so here I'm pointing out the hippocampus. And if you remember one thing of brain anatomy, I want you to remember the hippocampus. Hippocampus means seahorse in Greek. If you cut the brain in another direction, the hippocampus has the shape of a seahorse. And here I've depicted it on top of the temporal lobe. It actually sits deep in the temporal lobe. And why do I put emphasis on the hippocampus? That's the memory maker of your brain. So if this afternoon you're talking to somebody and they ask you, well, what did Dr. Bendheim have to say? And you say, well, he taught us about the hippocampus. That's evidence that your hippocampus is working right now. It's forming new memories. And as most of us, unfortunately, now have experience with Alzheimer's disease, the most common presenting symptom of Alzheimer's disease is the loss of short-term memory. Why is that? Because the hippocampus is the earliest structure generally affected by the abnormal pathology, the amyloid and tau protein buildups in the brain. So here you see the hippocampus at work, making short-term memories first and then transferring them to long-term memories. And on the right, you can see how it sits deep in the temporal lobes of the brain. So it's the target of Alzheimer's disease. The brain is where Alzheimer's disease takes place. And I've put the little sign above the hippocampus, the memory maker, and I've emphasized in the front, the frontal lobe, sorry, are your executive offices. And if you can read the small print, you have 100 billion brain cells. I'm talking about the brain cells that enable you to perform all of your activities. Those are the neurons, the cells that do the work of the brain. They're supported by approximately 10 times that number of housekeeping cells, the so-called glial cells. So back to the fundamental principles that underlie what I call the new science of the aging brain, principles that did not exist in the adult when I was a resident and even earlier in my career. So number one is brain plasticity. That means your brain can change its shape. If you use it, it forms new connections. And there is even evidence now that you can form new brain cells. And the primary catalyst for that is very modest physical exercise. And if you had to choose a place where to put the new neurons, given that memory loss is the first symptom in many patients with Alzheimer's disease, you'd put them in the hippocampus. And that's what the science has demonstrated, that modest physical exercise, walking 30 minutes a day, can actually generate new neurons in your hippocampus. And the other major principle is brain reserve. Even most high school students have an idea what physical reserve is. People that do a bit of exercise, manage stress, eat well, they build physical reserve. So if they get a cold or the flu or have to have surgery or over the past few years acquired COVID, those with physical reserve generally have less severe illnesses, quicker recovery from surgery. That's physical reserve. We now know that the analogous insurance policy for your brain is brain reserve or cognitive reserve. And how do you acquire that? By living a brain healthy lifestyle. So, is forgetting things mean you're on the road to dementia? Absolutely not. Actually, forgetting is hardwired into our brain. If we weren't able to forget some of the inputs that we get on a constant basis, our brain would be overloaded. So as we age, those moments of forgetfulness do increase in frequency, but they're not an indicator that you're on that slippery slope to dementia. So not being able to remember the name of somebody you met a week ago or even yesterday is not abnormal. I suffer from forgetting where I put my sunglasses, keys, and so my wife had and my wallet. My wife has a little sign on the front door reminding me to take those three things when I head out the door. And the other distinguishing feature, people that worry because they've forgotten something, that's generally a good sign. People with dementia, even with mild dementia, are often usually not aware of their memory lapses. So, and the other critical thing is normal aging doesn't interfere with your daily activities, your ability to live your life. Whereas if you have a form of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, then daily activities are impaired. So I mentioned before that the brain increases in function, acquires knowledge. You can see that in the lower right here. Verbal knowledge increases with age. Now, that's not to say that there aren't decreases in function with aging. So generally, older folks have a little more difficulty with working memory, making short-term and long-term memories than younger folks. But that's normal. Just like we can't move as fast when we're older as we can with the young. We don't consider that abnormal. That's normal aging. So these normal declines in certain aspects of brain functioning are not abnormal. They do not indicate dementia. So back to the statistics and the importance of us doing something about what's now an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease because of the aging population. Every day, 10,000 Americans turn 65. That's your number one risk for Alzheimer's disease, your age. So when you're 60, you have about a 1% chance of getting this terrible disease. Every 5 years, that risk more or less doubles. So the population over 80 in this country, depending on which study you look at, but the range is between 30 and 50% of Americans over the age of 80 will have dementia.
Mm.
And this is a terrible disease, obviously for the sufferer, but also for caregivers. Everybody who's involved with this disease has some degree of emotional, financial suffering. The Alzheimer's Association, from where I get these statistics, says that fully 2/3 of caregivers become clinically depressed. That's the toll this disease takes on people that love the Alzheimer's patient. And so that's why it's so important that caregivers recognize the resources that WellMed and other providers provide for you to help you on this difficult journey. So the good news is at least a third of all dementia cases are attributable to modifiable risk factors. And I don't include aging, that's not modifiable. And now I'm going to spend some time talking about what are these modifiable risk factors that we can do something about, each and every one of us in our daily lives. So you see at the top, being older than 65, can't modify that. But if you have mild cognitive impairment, which is often the first step toward dementia, you can modify that. The same lifestyle interventions that I promote for people that I call the worried well, people that are 50, 60, 70, and 80 that have no cognitive impairment but are worried about it. If they practice a brain healthy lifestyle, they reduce their risk. And you can see the big yellow arrow opposite unhealthy lifestyle. completely modifiable. And the bottom one is very important. That's social isolation, being shut off from a community or having poor engagement with other people. That's social isolation, loneliness, modifiable, but a significant risk factor, not just for Alzheimer's disease, but for depression, drug and alcohol abuse. And we're social animals. And when we lose a lifelong partner, a spouse, as friends move away or die, it's very easy to become more socially isolated. And that's where, again, I applaud WellMed for their community centers, where you can engage in activities that are fun and build both physical and cognitive reserve, and where you can meet other people and make new friends. And so uh, not become shut off from your community. So I would be amiss if I didn't mention the medical risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And there's quite a long list, but at the top, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, smoking, having a sleep abnormality like obstructive sleep apnea, too much alcohol use, depression, and very importantly, impaired hearing and impaired vision. People who don't maintain their hearing and vision have significantly a significantly increased risk, pardon me, for Alzheimer's disease. So I urge each and every one of us, and I include myself, have your hearing and vision tested on a yearly basis. If you need hearing aids, get them. And now they're much more affordable thanks to an act of Congress, I think passed in 2020 or 21. And of course, the same thing is true for corrected vision, glasses or contact lenses. Now, this is from a major study published now 9 years ago, and it basically repeats what I've just said. So, risk factors, things that increase your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, are high blood pressure, obesity, an unhealthy diet, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Whereas protective factors are education, lifelong education, taking classes for seniors, community centers or community colleges, wherever, is a protective, as are the lifestyle factors that I'll talk about here in more detail. And all of them help build brain reserve. That's your insurance policy. And generally, people that do these things, they feel better. And there's nothing wrong with having a better mood. So, how can we modify risk factors for millions and reduce the risk for millions of aging Americans? So there are 6 lifestyle factors that have been identified. And this from Dr. Stillman, who was at the University of Pittsburgh when she put this slide together, shows the 6. And now I'll spend a few minutes talking about each one in a bit of detail. But this was a major, for me, this was major to see this. Generally, government agencies are very conservative, which there's nothing wrong with that in the sense of they don't promote things until the evidence is very, very conclusive. So just a couple years ago, this came from the National Institute on Aging, and it showed that a combination of healthy lifestyle behaviors can reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And now, as I'll show you, every major health authority in this country it is supporting what BrainSavers started, these 6 pillars of healthy aging. So I mentioned that this major study was published in 2015. It became the cover of Scientific American. And in fact, I was getting on a plane, Glenda, to come and see Carol Zerniel and Laura in San Antonio.
Yeah.
Just as I was getting on the plane in Phoenix, I got a text message from a friend of mine in Colorado. He said, Paul, look at Scientific American. It proves BrainSavers. So that was a little bit of a overreach, but what the Scientific American article did was highlight the finger study, which I'll get to in a minute, that was published in 2015. And these are the words of Scientific American. A gold standard clinical trial provides evidence that diet, exercise, and an active social life can help prevent cognitive decline. So that was very gratifying. The finger study on which the Scientific American article was based was done in, it was the lead investigators were in Finland, and FINGER stands for Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. And you can see that the people that participated for 2 years got nutritional guidance, social activity, cognitive, brain training, physical exercise, and management of some of those medical risk factors that I've mentioned. The control group just got regular health advice. And the primary outcome was how well their brains performed after 2 years. And lo and behold, the people in the active arm, the people doing this multi-component lifestyle program, scored higher on all of these cognitive tests. And they're now, the follow-up period is almost over. The numbers, there were 1,200 people in the study, but given that only a few would be predicted to get Alzheimer's disease every year, that they were followed for 7 more years to see if in fact the improvement in cognitive function compared to the control group translates into fewer cases of Alzheimer's disease. So those results should be coming out within the next year or two. So the 6 components that BrainSavers pioneered are these 6: using your brain, exercising it; using your body, modest physical exercise; eating a nutritionally balanced, healthy diet; staying engaged, doing fun and engaging things with friends and family; managing stress. Our brains evolved to manage acute stress. So if the fire alarm went off where you are now, you'd know to get up and get out. What short-term stresses we know how to handle. That's the fight or flight mechanism. What our brains have not had time to evolve to handle are long-term stressors of modern life. Losing one's house because you can't make the mortgage payments, loved ones suffering from alcohol or drug abuse. Those are chronic stressors. The best studied chronic stress is depression. And we know that people with long-standing depression can actually be almost indistinguishable from a patient with Alzheimer's disease. And depression shrinks the hippocampus. And if the depression is treated, the hippocampus can grow back. So now, as I said, this is everywhere. The Cleveland Clinic is promoting the 6 pillars of brain health. Harvard Medical School published this guide to cognitive fitness. And I'll spend a little more time on that one because here's what they say: 6 simple steps can enhance your mental stamina, boost your memory, and provide added years of robust cognitive fitness. You'll feel better if you stay connected, which protects against cognitive decline. Physical exercise actually gives memory a boost. Stay intellectually challenged. Use your brain. I talk about the 20 muscles inside your brain. There actually are not muscles in your brain, but the networks, the lobes, the ganglia function as muscles in the sense if you exercise them, if you use them, they remain and can even get stronger. And a healthy diet can cut the risk of Alzheimer's disease, according to the Harvard experts, by as much as 50%. Sleep is where memories are made permanent. So if you don't get restful, restorative sleep on most nights during the week, your hippocampus can't do its job. During the night, I think this is in a later slide, the hippocampus acts as a film director, deciding which memories that were made during the day to keep and which ones to throw out. And as I've already mentioned, chronic stress can really damage your hippocampus. So last April or May, I was in Atlanta for the National Coalition on Aging annual conference, and AARP and Dr. Gupta were there promoting now their healthy brain behaviors. Again, exactly the same 6 pillars. So this is no longer voodoo science. This is mainstream. The challenge for all of us as individuals is to adopt those lifestyle changes into our own daily lives. And if we're working for an agency like for WellMed or BrainSavers or any number of other agencies, is to promote this across the population. And it really should start in childhood. Children have to be taught the importance of being their own health quarterbacks. And around the kitchen table, the dining room table, they have to be nourished properly. We have to get away from our junk food addictions. So here's what each of us can do. I think you all know by now where this is leading. Again, 1/3 of all dementia cases, some experts say closer to 50 or 60%, but this is now from the World Health Organization 12 years ago. So what we've incorporated into the BrainSavers program are those 6. And here you see a picture of a group participating with the instructor, and she's 78 years old in the yellow shirt. So socialization, let's get back to that. There are very well-controlled academic studies now that demonstrate that if you stay socially integrated, that delays memory loss in elderly individuals. And it's actually possible to change the downward slope of cognitive decline by getting and staying socially involved. So again, get to these WellMed centers because all of that is available there. You can see the partial list of educational programs. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. And all the recreational programs, all of those are going to help you build brain reserve. Pick out the ones that are fun for you and at least modestly challenging. You want to, my trigger finger is too active. You want to challenge your brain. So one of the great ways to build brain reserve, keep your brain nimble and sharp, is to learn a new language. But if you want to learn Spanish and you've never, well, it's doing it on its own now. It's telling me I'm running out of time. If you're not going to learn Spanish by going to an advanced Spanish class if you've never spoken Spanish. Start with a beginner's class. And over time, you'll advance to a more difficult class and eventually to an advanced class. You don't want to defeat the purpose. Okay, physical exercise. This is the most intensely studied because it's arguably the easiest to study. And it's now been shown that modest physical exercise, again, simply walking at a pace that's comfortable for you, 30 minutes, 5 times a day, will not only improve your heart, pulmonary, bone, muscle function, but for our purposes, your brain function. It actually can, and as this study shows, you get an enlargement of the hippocampus with modest physical exercise. And I'm not dismissing strength-bearing exercises, which are important, especially for women at more risk for osteoporosis, flexibility and balance, which reduce your risk for falls. They should all be incorporated into a complete physical exercise program. And they all have some evidence to promote brain health, but the overwhelming evidence is that modest stamina building endurance exercise, walking, swimming, cycling, things that get your heart rate up a little bit is what is best for your brain. So here you see a study done at the University of Pittsburgh that showed 1 year of modest physical exercise increased the volumes of the hippocampus on both sides. Very, very important science. How about using your brain? This is hard to study because, we're using our brains all the time. But now, 11 years ago, Dr. Joseph Coyle, a professor at Harvard, wrote an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine titled Use It or Lose It. Do effortful mental activities protect against dementia? He asked the question. 2 years later, several neuropsychologists from Australia looked at all the evidence, and they found that there's robust evidence that complex patterns of mental activity, early, mid, and late life stages, is associated with significant reduction in dementia incidence. So what do we do what do we mean by complex patterns of mental activity? Learning a language, doing a variety of things like book clubs. The list is endless. Whether you live in San Antonio or Phoenix or wherever, your community is full of intellectually fun and stimulating activities that help build brain reserve. The key is to get out there and do the ones that challenge you modestly, make your brain work a little bit. I talk about a few beads of brain sweat because people understand if you're physically exercising, a few sweats is evidence. A few beads of sweat on your body is evidence. Well, if you feel like, boy, this is a little tough doing whether it's Sudoku or whatever, and there's no single magic bullet. A variety of mentally engaging activities is what the doctor ordered. And I have to just show this. This is from a pioneering study done in London. Any of you that have been in a London taxi cab know that the drivers don't use GPS, they don't use maps. It's all in their brain. How? They have to pass an exam called the knowledge. It takes on average, if I remember correctly, 3 years of memorizing all of central London to be able to do that. So, if Glenda had a little restaurant or a pub in London, and I said to the taxi driver, I want to go to Glenda's restaurant, he'd say, bloody good, mate, we're on our way. And he'd drive me, and there we would be. Well, the researchers demonstrated using MRI, sophisticated imaging, that these taxi cab drivers that passed this exam, their hippocampus was larger than the controls. And it was larger in one particular part, the back part of the hippocampus, which we knew from animal studies is where geographic memory is stored. So this is a wonderful example of neuroplasticity in action. What about nutrition? We all like to eat. The critical thing is to eat well. And we now know that the Mediterranean diet, even if only modestly adhered to, is associated with a significant risk reduction for Alzheimer's disease. And now there's literally dozens, if not hundreds of papers attesting to the benefits of the Mediterranean diet and some derivatives of it, the MIND diet, the DASH diet. And here's a little pyramid description of the Mediterranean diet. And I want you to pay attention to the lower 3 or 4 layers. You see whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy products. And then above that, fish, poultry, nuts, seeds, and at the very top, red meat. There's nothing wrong with having an occasional portion of red meat, but the American diet, because of the fat content in red meat, is not the healthiest. So it behooves us all to make slow but modest modifications in what we eat. It's good for your overall health, decreases your risk of cardiovascular disease. That was the first major disease group that the Mediterranean diet was demonstrated to be beneficial for, but now very clearly it's beneficial for your brain. What's missing is a glass of red wine at the top. That's part of the Mediterranean diet. But you don't need the red wine to get all the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. And I say, if you enjoy an alcoholic drink, but never more than one a day, and there's no reason to start drinking because of what I'm saying now, and certainly if you have medical or religious reasons not to consume alcohol, you get all the benefits of the healthy Mediterranean diet without the alcohol. I mentioned sleep. Sleep is critical for forming permanent memories. I mentioned that the hippocampus acts as a film director at night, reviewing the day's films over and over again and deciding which frames to keep and which to throw out. And this goes on. So new memories formed today will be reviewed on Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the next week or two, every night during sleep, so that finally the ones that are destined to be permanent are transferred out of the hippocampus to the gray matter cortex, where they become permanent memories. And even Shakespeare, all those years ago, realized that while we're sleeping, something important is going on. And that's his sonnet there on the left. And finally, we've already mentioned stress. can't eliminate acute stress, fire alarms, hearing that a friend has been taken to the hospital, or car accidents. The list goes on and on of acute short-term stressors. But it's the chronic stress that wreaks havoc in your brain. And that's what we have to learn to control by finding stress reducers, whether it's taking a 10-minute walk, listening to some soothing music, looking at a beautiful art book. There are endless ways of doing meditation or yoga. There are endless ways to manage chronic stress. We each have to find a way that works for us. And if you're having problems, that's when you talk with a psychologist, trusted friend, and work on this, because it's no fun to feel stress on a chronic basis, and it certainly is damaging to health. So knowing this is not enough. We have to do it. And the biggest burden to doing it is our attitudes. And so at BrainSavers, we talk about the science of change. And simply being uh, willing to change is not enough. We all know this. New Year's resolutions uh, don't last long. According to this study, only 1 out of 5 people kept their New Year's resolution after 2 years. 77% quit after 1 week. Change takes much more than willpower. Willpower is all you need to change. True or false? Absolutely false. Not having willpower was the top reason given for not making or following through with health changes. The fact is, you can have all the willpower in the world, but if you're not ready to make changes, that willpower is not going to come to force. So it's not that some people will have willpower and some don't. It's that some people are ready to change and others are not. And this is where the buddy system, people that can help you make changes, get ready to change, are so important. And again, having friends, making new friends at a community center will make it much easier to make initially just small changes. Pick out one of the lifestyle factors that you'd like to make changes in and work on that first. And once you achieve that, you'll find working on the other ones become easier. And I generally advise start with the physical exercise part. Even a 5 or 10 minute walk, you'll feel somewhat better, and you can build on that so that over 6 months, perhaps you build up to the 30 minutes 5 times a week. And this is what the Alzheimer's Association said a number of years ago. If we make brain healthy lifestyle changes and take action by getting involved, we could realize a future without Alzheimer's disease. I doubt Alzheimer's disease is going away, but it could certainly be greatly reduced and help a lot of people in our society.
We have
So I
about
want to
15
thank,
minutes left, Dr. Bendheim.
okay, well, I think this is the next to last slide.
Oh, great.
So I want to acknowledge some of my team at BrainSavers that helped develop this now 2 years of curriculum that we have. You join a BrainSavers class. And Glenda probably doesn't know this because we haven't released it, but we're now producing videos so that people can do this on their own time, the same content, but on videos that they can do through a computer or a cell phone. And finally, I want to acknowledge again the team at WellMed that's been so supportive and has been pioneering in their own sense by the Healthy Brain Initiative. So you all know Glenda from the SOS Connections. Tina Smith, I think, is one of the major drivers of this. And of course, Carol Zerniel is the executive director of the WellMed Foundation. Laura Cisneros is the overall director of the senior centers. And Minerva saved me today. So that's part of the team. That's part of the team at WellMed that makes this all possible. Okay, well, so Glenda, I think that's it.
Oh, great. I mean, good time management. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amy in the chat box says, do you know much about the research coming out regarding hearing loss and the link to dementia? You touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, the evidence is increasingly persuasive and, in fact, overwhelming that people with acquired hearing loss as they age have a significantly increased risk of overall dementia and specifically Alzheimer's disease. Um, Off the top of my head, I think if I recall the last study that I looked at, the risk increases by more than 30%. And hearing loss is a modifiable risk factor. Most people, not all, of course, most people can bring their hearing back to their baseline with hearing aids. And as I mentioned, thanks to an act of Congress, uh, now hearing aids are accessible. You don't have to go to an ear, nose, and throat specialist and have your hearing tested. You can go to your neighborhood pharmacy or Costco or Walmart, and I think many of them now have hearing centers where you can get tested and fitted with hearing aids that are much more affordable than in the past. So we're talking about perhaps $200 for hearing aids, where not too long ago you're talking about $2,000. I remember reading one place that um, hearing aids before this act of Congress were often the third most expensive item purchased by an aging individual after their home, their car, hearing aids was the third most expensive item. And so that put it out of reach for many people that need this intervention. So good question. And yes, absolutely, hearing loss is associated with cognitive decline.
Mhm. I got my hearing aids years ago and sure has made a difference in my life. I support that
Yeah.
philosophy totally. Okay, let's see here. Um, Todd wanted to know when and where the recordings will be available, and Minerva answered him right there. Let's see. What do you think about daytime naps for adults? Do you think they are beneficial? That's from Shane.
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, I haven't looked at this very recently, but I know in the past in Japan, a daytime nap was mandated in workplaces. Um, so the key is not there's it can be very beneficial. Lyndon Johnson, president from your state, he was famous for being able to take a little 15 or 20-minute nap and be completely refreshed, ready to deal with the problems that issues that only a president has to deal with. So the advice is to take, if you need a nap in late morning or early afternoon, to take one. Try and keep it under an hour, and don't take naps late in the afternoon because they're going to interfere with your ability to go to sleep at your regular bedtime. So nothing wrong with that. My
Juan,
philosophy is people ought to be happy if a nap.
pues vete a trabajar. O sea,
Maybe.
sí, pero lo que querías escuchar.
Okay, go ahead. I
Yeah.
muted that.
Okay. If taking a nap of modest duration increases your ability to enjoy your life, it's of health benefit to you.
Oh, yeah. And it
So
feels good too.
yeah, well, that's exactly right. And so that gets, that leads me to make another comment about brain healthy, body healthy nutrition. Why do most diet nutritional plans fail? Because they make us feel guilty when we eat something that's not in there. If we have a cookie or a hot fudge sundae or a good, delicious cheeseburger once in a while, those are not recommended in these diets. And that's why most of them fail, because they make people feel guilty, and none of us want to feel guilty. So my advice is try to adapt the Mediterranean or a similar diet over time, increase the number of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, etc. But don't deny yourself that occasional cheeseburger, handful of potato chips, a few delicious cookies or a donut. And I say this when I speak often publicly about this. I'd rather live to 80 with a smile on my face, knowing that I've enjoyed those treats, than live to 85 feeling grumpy because I've denied myself those little things in life. So Same thing with a nap, right?
All right. You
Okay.
just summed up my life philosophy.
Good. Well, that's good. Well, that's why, you're a happy person. I know that. You're
I
smart.
am.
Yeah.
I
And
am. Ed wants to know how much does hereditary family genes factor into the risk of getting Alzheimer's disease? Good
yeah, very
question.
good. Yeah, it's a very good question. So the vast majority of Alzheimer's cases occur after the age of 60. I told you about, when you're 60, you have a 1%. That's uh, classic Alzheimer's disease. About 2 or 3% of all Alzheimer's victims will have the onset before the age of 60. And we talk about familial or hereditary forms of Alzheimer's. And we've now identified a small number of genes. A mutation in one of those genes can cause early onset Alzheimer's disease. So if there's a family history of individuals suffering from early onset memory loss, dementia, uh, children of those grandchildren may be at increased risk. That can be tested for, but most of us don't have to worry about that. Most of us are at risk for garden variety, age associated cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
Well,
Have,
well, I've just had one other thing. So I
yeah.
think most of the audience has heard of the ApoE4 gene. That's a gene that's involved in cholesterol metabolism. And depending on which form of that gene you have, that will either increase or decrease your risk of Alzheimer's disease, independent of early onset Alzheimer's disease. So we don't have a way to modify that, but and it doesn't change the impact of healthy lifestyle.
Hmm,
But that's a genetic risk factor, no matter what your age is.
yeah. Have there been any studies initiated having to do with COVID and what that did to people's brain health or onset of dementia or anything like that?
Yeah, there have been a number of reports and there's ongoing research of that COVID has, uh, especially long COVID, has negative brain effects. People talk about COVID brain fog and whatnot.
Hmm.
The mechanism isn't completely known, but there's some early data coming out that the inflammatory response, anytime we're exposed to a virus or anything that doesn't belong in our body, we mount an immune inflammatory response. And it looks like some people with the cognitive issues associated with long COVID may have ongoing inflammatory changes in their brain. So the good news there is if that's true, then anti-inflammatory treatments may in fact prove beneficial, but
Hmm.
it's still relatively early.
But at least they're looking at it,
Oh
which,
yeah, for sure, because it's not I wouldn't say it's a common problem, but it's not uncommon. I mean, I have a family member who's actually a retired physician who uh, has long COVID, and he complains. He says, geez, he's my cousin. He says, Cousin Paul, my brain is just not working the way it used to.
hmm,
And he has fatigue. He has a hard time not taking a long nap in the afternoon. So it's absolutely a real phenomenon.
no. Well, thanks for addressing that. Thomas wants to know, I have a few dementias. Well, okay. He has a few people in his family that suffer from dementia. My question is, does 30 years of working nights increase my chance for dementia? I'm retired now and regular sleep schedule, but he didn't for a long time.
Yeah. Well, so that's a good question. I don't know if it's really answerable in a credible way, but I would predict that if he was getting good sleep during the day, so that when he
Hmm.
woke up, if he had to go to work at 8 at night, if he woke up at 4 in the afternoon or 5, 6, whatever, and he felt refreshed, that would be encouraging to say that, in fact, no, he's not at increased risk. But I can't say that categorically. I don't think I'm not aware of studies that have looked at that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But now that I mean, if he's getting good sleep now at night, this was Thomas, you said?
Thomas, yes.
Yeah, Thomas, keep it up. Get your sleep. It's critically important.
Yeah. Hmm. One of my challenges in life.
Yeah,
Um,
well, you're not alone, Glenda.
I know.
As people age, they have increasing difficulty getting the kind of sleep they got when they were younger. People have to get up to urinate. They have aches and pains because of various arthritic conditions. Uh, and if it's really an issue, so that the question I ask patients is not how long they slept, because there are outliers. Some people do perfectly fine with 5 or 6 hours. Other people need 10 or 11. The critical question in my mind is when you get up in the morning, on most mornings, do you feel refreshed, ready to go out and enjoy your life? And if the answer was yes, that was pretty satisfactory to me. If the answer was no, then it calls for a deeper investigation. And
Mm,
and and now, every even modest sized city has sleep doctors, sleep experts. And, one of the great, only recently recognized conditions that is actually a big risk factor for cardiovascular health and brain health is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, uh, and chronic sleep apnea. And people need to address those. So
yeah.
people, yeah, if you're uh, find yourself waking up gasping for air, or if your partner says you stop breathing, you're snoring very loudly, that calls for an investigation. Because
Yeah.
chronic sleep apnea is a big risk factor.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay, last question. Are there certain supplements we should be taking now to help reduce the risk? This is from Amy.
I can't overemphasize the answer no.
Hmm.
There, the supplement industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are all sorts of supplements advertised as good for your memory, good for your brain, good for your cognitive health. None of them have the kind of evidence that would be required to have the approval of the FDA for a drug. Now, there are some supplements, like if your doctor determines that you need B12 or a multi-mineral supplement or a supplement for thyroid deficiency, the answer is yes. But there's no evidence that any of these highly touted, highly advertised brain supplements are beneficial. What I advise people to do is don't spend money on supplements. Try and eat a well-balanced nutritional diet. And instead of spending money on supplements, treat yourself to a good fish dinner at your local restaurant. That 2 or 3 portions of fish every week have demonstrated in endless studies to be beneficial. Whereas omega-3 supplements, which omega-3 is one of the fatty acids found in fish, if you take it as a supplement, it hasn't been shown to have the same benefit as getting it in its natural state, meaning in a piece of fish.
Hmm.
So we become a country of highly processed foods and relying on unproven interventions like supplements rather than getting back to the basics, which is the lifestyle that for millions of years evolved and has proven to be beneficial. A little exercise, eating foods that you can recognize as natural, not processed, and so on and so forth.
Great. Um, Todd, your phone is unmuted. Did you have a brief question you wanted to ask?
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Oh, no, not a problem, not a problem. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I think it was a very good session. I know there was a lot of information there. I was taking notes myself as Dr. Bendheim was going along. So do you have final words for our participants today, Dr. Bendheim?
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining, listening to me. I I hope it's clear that this is my life's work. I have a passion for this, and I know that it helps people, which is very gratifying. So I encourage all of you to, uh, if you see where you can improve your own life by changing one of your lifestyle behaviors, Do that. And if it's difficult for you to start, find a buddy. Go to one of the community centers and just slowly start building a more evidence-based healthy lifestyle. You won't regret it. So
It's never
thanks.
too late to start, right?
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Baby
And
steps.
yeah, thanks, Glenda. And please thank the whole crew there at WellMed for me.
I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Bendheim, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for what you do as caregivers. I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.